On the 17th of July, 88 years ago, a nationalist coup d'etat backed by Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy began a civil war which sought to overthrow the Second Spanish Republic, which itself had been established after a mass movement which ousted a military dictatorship backed by the King of Spain, that of Miguel Primo de Rivera. The Spanish Civil War, one of the bloodiest conflicts in modern European geographical history before the outbreak of World War II, would end in the death of over 500,000 people, the destruction of the Second Spanish Republic, and the start of the dark period of time in Spanish history, which continues to haunt Spanish society to this day, the period in which Francisco Franco, el caudillo, ruled Spain. Why? Why did the Spanish Civil War happen?
The answer to that question revolves entirely around the Second Spanish Republic, why it was formed, its histories, what changes it brought to Spanish society, its many shortcomings, why many in the Spanish ruling class sought to overthrow it, and why it was so weak that it practically allowed itself to be overthrown. In case you were wondering, this is not going to be your typical Second Spanish Republic nostalgia video. So if you were looking for that, anda pa allá. This is more of a Marxist critique of the Second Spanish Republic. And if that makes you uncomfortable, mi alma, I'm sorry. I don't know how to comfort you about this, but this is what I'm serving you today. Take it or leave it. But before we start this video, need I remind you that the Marxism Today gang has a Patreon, and it's how me and the gang get compensated for our labor. So if you want to support us and also get us to release videos more often, head on down there, okay? Also, we have a TikTok and a Twitter, so follow us on TikTok and Twitter, and follow me on TikTok and Twitter. I promise I'm funny sometimes. Promise. But most importantly, how about you go and continue to support my kasama Justine in the Philippines, who has currently been red tagged by the bureaucrat capitalist government for being a peasant organizer that has been fighting against the injustices in the Philippines. So if you're a supporter of the National Democratic Movement and you want to support it in some way, how about you support this kasama right now, okay? Justine is actually in big trouble with the bureaucrat capitalist class for doing this work. So I would say it's probably a good idea for you to support Justine. Also, another thing I want to put on your radar before we begin this video is the Filipino Toyota workers that were illegally dismissed from their jobs. They've been fighting for over a decade. They don't have a donation link right now, but no media is talking about them, so I'm going to talk about them. And I'll make sure to make a whole video about them. I just want to put that on your radar first. Support Justine! Support the Filipino Toyota workers! Imperialismo y bagsak, you feel me? Anyway, back to the video.
The Second Spanish Republic was established in 1931 as a result of a mass movement made up of a diverse front of Republicans, meaning people who sought to abolish the monarchy, ousted the extremely unpopular King Alfonso XIII of Spain.
Why was the king so unpopular? Well, he lived an incredibly publicly decadent life during the period of time in Spanish history after the Spanish-American War, where there's a lot of people that were struggling and literally starving, while he, the military, the church, and all the bourgeois class were throwing banquets and living life to the fullest.
Alfonso vigorously supported the Spanish military's crackdown of anarchists and Catalan nationalists in Catalonia, and Andalusian communists during the Bolshevik triennium, a period of 3 years in Andalusia littered with communist revolutions, strikes, assassinations, and demonstrations which were inspired by the Bolshevik Revolution, a fascinating topic for another video. As a result of this, King Alfonso, who at the time had a huge influence over the military, demanded a further crackdown on Spanish political life so that no one who opposed the monarchy could gain political power. Alfonso XIII also became more unpopular during the Rif War fought between the Spanish army and the Republic of the Rif in modern-day Morocco, which struggled for national liberation against the Spanish protectorate. The Rif War caused a split in Spanish politics between those who, like the king, wanted Spain to establish a new empire in Africa, known as Africanistas, and a united front of anti-imperialists, anti-war activists, and liberals who saw these attempts less so as immoral and more so as wasteful, who wanted Spain to abandon its protectorate in Morocco and attempts at taking over the African continent, known as Abandonistas. But the Abandonistas gained more steam after the disastrous Battle of Anual. In an awesome turn of events, the Republic of the Rif absolutely decimated the Spanish army of 20,000 men in one battle with 3,000 Imazigan legends, causing 13,000 casualties in the Spanish army. This, combined with the fact that the king was not in Spain and did not return to Spain to comfort the families of those lost during this battle, and instead continued his vacation in France, really pissed off the Spanish people, leading to a lot of people not seeing a fucking point to this extremely expensive war, especially as they were still struggling and starving. This anger led to massive demonstrations where people burned the Spanish flag and waved the flags of the Republic of the Rif. It also led to strikes and mutinies by Spanish soldiers who were embarked on ships to Morocco. The Abandonistas had won over the people of Spain, and the colonial-minded bourgeois Africanistas, the king included, began to get really worried. So, Alfonso did another incredibly unpopular thing that further cemented people's hate for him. He supported Capitán General Miguel Primo de Rivera's coup in 1923, led by Africanistas, to restore order in Spain so that they could continue this colonial expansion.
Suffice to say, people were so fucking done with this guy. Estaban hasta el gorro de este tío, okay?
The Spanish Republican movement grew immensely despite heavy crackdowns from Primo de Rivera's government, with King Alfonso being correctly identified as the enemy of the Spanish people's will. And on August 17, 1930, representatives of nearly all reformist factions of the Republican movement, the Democratic Socialists, Liberals, Catalan and Galician Nationalists, and more, held a meeting led by Niceto Alcalá Zamora in Donostia or San Sebastián and signed a pact to form a revolutionary committee to bring about the end of the Spanish monarchy and the establishment of the Second Spanish Republic by election or by force. They had close contacts with the military, which might be surprising to some, but at this time the Spanish military was a little more divided than it ever would be again around the question of the monarchy, and many of them believed that the heavy hand of the military could still control Spanish society without a king. In fact, there was an unsuccessful coup against the Spanish monarchy following this meeting led by Fermín Galán and other members of the Spanish military who aligned with the Republicans. The Republican movement mobilized so many people and made Primo de Rivera super unpopular, to the point that even the king was begging him to leave, so he was forced to resign. This led to a short period of time called the soft dictatorship, or dicta blanda, where Republicans gained even more popularity, and finally, King Alfonso was essentially forced to hold a parliamentary election on April 12th. Despite attempts from the ruling class to meddle with the elections, especially in rural areas where landlords threatened and paid people to vote for monarchist parties and recorded people who were literally dead as voters who voted in their favor, the Republican front of liberals, Democratic Socialists, and Communists won a majority. The result of this election caused celebration across Spain. Including right outside of Alfonso's palace. The king freaked out because he, like all monarchs in Europe at that time, had secondhand PTSD from the storming of the Winter Palace. He begged the military to disperse the people, but they refused.
Not long after, the cowardly Alfonso fled Spain with his tail tucked between his legs and spent the rest of his life pretending to be king of a country that did not want him.
The news of his flight out of Spain only made people celebrate harder, and in the early hours of Tuesday, the 14th of April, in the city of Eibar, the people lifted the tricolor flag for the first time, and Spain, for the second time in its history, was declared a republic. The Revolutionary Committee formed during the Pact of San Sebastián became the interim government effective immediately and set an election for the 28th of June of that same year, which would be won by El Partido Socialista Obrero Español, or PSOE, and El Partido Radical, or the Radical Party.
So now the republic has been re-established. The republic that half of Spain today wants to return to. So what happens next? Well, from a Marxist perspective, vaya tela.
Keep in mind, despite being a progressive force in Spanish history which to some degree challenged the interests of the aristocratic, terrateniente, landowning class in Spain and the Catholic Church, the Second Spanish Republic was a liberal democracy and welfare state. It was not a socialist state, and it was definitely not a dictatorship of the proletariat. Let's start by talking about the new constitution, which brought a lot of much-needed changes to Spanish society. The new constitution implemented women's suffrage. It established the separation of church and state, and established freedom of religion to all, including non-Christians, which, as a Spanish Filipino Jew, I cannot emphasize how huge that was, considering literally all of Spanish history at that point. It also removed many of the privileges the Roman Catholic Church had in Spain. It allowed for civil marriage and divorce, and it established the first statutes of autonomy in Euskadi and Catalonia, including the creation of the Generalitat de Catalunya. The Republican government made many reforms which sought to improve the lives of most people in the country, including educational reforms. They increased the public education budget by 50% and penned 5,000 new schools every year in Spain. This is a huge deal because a lot of Spain at that time was still illiterate, especially those part of peasant and jornalero families. There are also many land reform measures passed by the government, including the nationalization of properties possessed by the Roman Catholic Church. They also redistributed large swathes of land to the jornaleros, the land workers or peasants, the people who worked the land in the south of Spain, including Andalusia, where terratenientes owned the majority of the land and unsurprisingly treated the jornaleros like absolute shit. There were also some labor reforms introduced by one of the leaders of the government and former trade unionist, Francisco Largo Caballero, who later became Prime Minister of the Second Spanish Republic. As Minister of Labor Relations, Largo Caballero introduced lots of labor reforms including a minimum wage, social security, compulsory health insurance, wide salary increases for workers, and the existence of paid vacations, all of which did not exist in Spain as law of the land previous to the Second Spanish Republic. And finally, there were military reforms introduced by the Minister of War, Manuel Azaña, which really managed to piss off a lot of the bourgeois, nepo baby, warmongering, bootlicking members of the Spanish military, solidifying the hatred of the bourgeois military class of Spain against the Republicans forever and ever. However, the actual implementation of these labor and land reforms was incredibly slow, as it was a liberal democracy and not a dictatorship of the proletariat. The government of the Republic was still dictated by the more progressive wing of the Spanish bourgeoisie, not the working class, though there was clearly lots of concessions handed over by the progressive Spanish bourgeoisie in power to the Spanish working class during the time of the Second Spanish Republic. There was no true seizure of the means of production by the Spanish proletariat, and these concessions rarely affected the capital of the Spanish bourgeoisie who supported the liberal republic, and in turn did not relieve any of the workers who were still being exploited by them. Large factory owners who voted for the Republicans still sold the wages of their workers. Clearly seeing the contradiction here between what the Republic claimed to care for and what their class interests actually showed, there were many working class left-wing revolts against the Second Spanish Republic, even in its earliest years, which demanded that they be given the reforms they were promised, and the Republic responded violently against them every fucking time. For example, in the massacre of Casaviejas in Cádiz in January of 1933, where 28 jornaleros affiliated with the CNT who were demanding that the promises of the agrarian reform by the Republican government were fulfilled were murdered by the Spanish Republican Civil Guard, who shot them to death and burned them alive. And keep in mind, this happened during the most progressive, reformist era of the Second Spanish Republic. Also, the Second Spanish Republic, again a liberal welfare state, did nothing to actually crack down on reactionaries, as many of the Spanish Republican bourgeoisie were them, which made the anti-authoritarian, except when it came to cracking down on workers, Second Spanish Republic incredibly unstable and prone to coup attempts, like Sanjurjo's attempt. And under this liberal republic where fascists were allowed to breed and breathe, José Antonio Primo de Rivera, the son of the dictator Miguel Primo de Rivera, mind you, created La Falange Española, the very party which, because it was not cracked down on by the liberal republic, would later play a pivotal role in the overthrow of the Second Spanish Republic. Additionally, the more conservative monarchist wing of the Spanish bourgeoisie were really pissed off by the reforms, so some of them formed the conservative CEDA coalition, which won big in the November 1933 election with financial backing from the Catholic Church. And they immediately halted the reforms put in by PSOE and created counter-reforms to take away those much-awaited promises.
So cool that they allowed them to run in the first place. So anti-authoritarian, so freedom and democracy.
In response to this, many people part of PSOE did the actual one good thing that PSOE ever did, because some of them went, maybe the party called the Spanish Socialist Workers' Party should act like a socialist party for the workers. So with the support of Largo Caballero, PSOE, la UGT y CNT, PSOE, UGT, and CNT launched a revolutionary national strike against the CEDA coalition's rollback of the labor reforms. This strike was mainly concentrated in the regions of Catalunya and Asturias, and had a lot of support from the Catalan nationalist movement, even leading to the president of the Generalitat, Lluís Companys, declaring Catalan independence from Spain. And in Asturias, for the first and probably only time in history, communists and anarchists banded together and took over the mining bases of Oviedo. The working class of Spain was done. They wanted an actual socialist government. They wanted the restoration of the reforms. They wanted what the Republic had promised them. And it was violently squashed by the Republic. And the Republic killed 2,000 workers in the process of squashing it. They also arrested the Catalan president of the Generalitat for supporting it and declaring independence. And here's a fun fact. What general did the Second Spanish Republic send to severely repress the communists and anarchists in Asturias, resulting in the murder of 1,623 people, the injury of 3,000 others, and the arrest of 30,000 people? General Francisco Franco.
Yes, because despite the supposedly revolutionary Republican reforms of the Spanish military, they somehow allowed him, a clear africanista, fascista, hijo de su padre y su madre que le parió, to continue holding a very high position in the Spanish military. Es que hay que ver. Es que hay que ver. Es que hay que ver.
The Republican bourgeoisie were in shambles and fighting amongst themselves, and in 1936, Zamora, yes, he's still in power, called for another election in 1936, where the Popular Front of more progressive-leaning Republicans wins and reestablishes Manuel Azaña as president of the government. And in an attempt to calm down the political tensions in Spain, which they caused by murdering people, Azaña called for amnesty for political prisoners of the revolutionary strike of 1934, letting many of the revolutionaries free, and finally, in 1936, sending Franco away because all this time he held an incredibly important position in the Republican military. He was organizing members of the military to overthrow the government. So they were finally like, maybe he shouldn't have the power that he has. Crazy. Who would have thought about this? Who would have thought that if you don't purge reactionary, fascist, monarchist sentiment from the literal military of your newly established Republican country, they might try to overthrow you? Despite these attempts to cool down the political situation in Spain, the Republic was frankly way too late. They had put all their energy into repressing and killing the left and allowed the far right to grow throughout the years with no similar crackdowns. The right-wing nationalists, the phalangists and fascists, the military, the Catholic Church were able to unite and were strengthened by support from Nazi Germany and fascist Italy. They had a coup planned already in place before Franco was banished, and now it was just a matter of waiting for the right moment to start their coup. And the right moment came after July 13th, 1936, when the far-right monarchist political leader José Calvo Sotelo was assassinated in retribution for the murder of anti-fascist socialist militia member and Republican police officer.
Yeah, I know. I actually don't know. I don't know. I don't know. Okay? I don't know.
José Castillo, because he was the leader of the more Republican-leaning assault guard who put down a fascist riot during the funeral of a Guardia Civil. The Nationalists took this opportunity to unite the outraged reactionaries and officially begin their coup days later, and so began the Spanish Civil War. So, you ask me, why did the Spanish Civil War happen? Well, I'm not going to give you the liberal answer, which is, well, because Spain was so polarized and divided, it was bound to happen. If only the Republic had been more liberal, didn't upset the right wing so much, cared more for compromise, maybe it wouldn't have even happened. No, the Spanish Civil War happened because of two things. First of all, because the conservative elements of the ruling class, the aristocrats, the monarchists, the Catholic land-owning clergy, the bourgeois imperialist-minded military families wanted Spain to return to their version of class society, one where feudalism's remnants are allowed to still exist and exploit, one where communist, progressive liberal, anti-imperialist, atheist, Republican ideas that threatened their class interests were violently squashed, where the jornaleros, where the proletariat, women, and ethnic and religious minorities were once again squashed under their boot, like those glorious Catholic kings did to the Muslims and the Jews when they reconquered Spain. The nationalists during the Spanish Civil War wanted to once again reconquer Spain, much like Vox and the fascist front today in Spain wants to do as well. Secondly, and most importantly in my eyes, the Spanish Civil War happened because the Second Spanish Republic was a pathetic, liberal welfare state which violently suppressed and constantly murdered workers who fought for their rights. The Spanish Civil War happened because that weak, bourgeois, stupid government of the Second Spanish Republic did little to nothing to protect itself from being overthrown. It happened because despite it being the most progressive government Spain ever had, it was still a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, as evident in the fact that they did not protect the working class of Spain from having the republic they voted for be overthrown by those who wanted to exploit them to the fullest potential they once could in the past. Because the working class of Spain was not in power. The working class of Spain was actually constantly oppressed by the Second Spanish Republic because they tried to seize what the Republic had promised them. A new, better life for them and their families. Ownership over the land that they tilled. The factories that they worked. And the fact that the Second Spanish Republic is mourned as a non-authoritarian left-wing government that could have been so successful if there wasn't so much left-wing infighting by those on the supposed anti-Stalinist left, whatever that means, okay, should actually make you understand why Stalin was right. Why the USSR in its earliest years was right to be so quote-unquote authoritarian. Because maybe if the Second Spanish Republic had actually been more authoritarian, aka had actually been a dictatorship of the proletariat, had actually seized the means of production from the bourgeoisie, had actually cracked down on the fascists and the Catholic Church, to the extent that they should have, had purged the military of the reactionaries that sought to overthrow it, maybe 500,000 people wouldn't have had to die. Maybe Spain would have at least been a republic for much longer than less than a decade. Maybe Franco wouldn't have ever come to power. And I say this as a Spanish Republican. I do mourn the fact that we do not have a republic anymore, that we lost the civil war against Franco, and I honor those fellow Spanish people and international brigadiers who died fighting for the Second Spanish Republic. I would have died for the Second Spanish Republic, and I will do everything in my power to support a third Spanish Republic. I'm fully in support of the movement right now in Spain, which seeks to oust Felipe, like those before us who forced Alfonso to abdicate. But we need to be scientific here. If we are smart, okay, and if we don't want to be overthrown once again by a fascist coup, then we will learn from the history of the Second Spanish Republic. In other words, we don't just need a republic, we need a socialist republic. A real socialist republic, not a liberal welfare state. The government of the constitutional monarchy of Spain today calls itself socialist, as do their reactionary enemies, but anyone with a brain already knows that's not true. We see what they do to workers in our country. We see what they do to asylum seekers of imperialist wars who want to build a better life for themselves in our country. We see how they collaborate with the imperialist, Zionist, settler state of Israel, despite their supposed support for the Palestinian people, and see how they support imperialist puppets across the world. The government of PSOE today is even worse than the Second Spanish Republic ever was. We don't need these imperialist social democrats in power in a constitutional monarchy which still uses our tax dollars to fund the pretty little blonde princess's private boarding school in Norway or wherever the hell it is, while foreigners and tourists buy up all our houses as their summer vacation spots, and our proletariat continues to struggle to find work in our country 16 years after la crisis, and after a global epidemic that forced a screeching halt on our tourist-dependent capitalist economy. We need an actual socialist republic, a Marxist-led, anti-imperialist, anti-revisionist Third Spanish Republic that will truly take the power away from the Spanish ruling class and hand it over to the Spanish working class, that will not pull its punches when it comes to defending itself from foreign invasions, that will kick the British out of Gibraltar so that it cannot be used as a base to launch an invasion into our country or threaten us with the possibility of doing so in order to bend us to their will, that will kick the American military presence in Spain out so that it cannot continue to be used as a launching pad for imperialist wars in the Middle East. We need true agrarian reform. We need a real Marxist party in power that will lead a cultural revolution like the one in China that will squash the reactionaries, because we need the third one to be the last one. The last one, which will not be overthrown for the sake of our working class. A por la tercera, coño!
I hope you enjoyed the video today and my new setup. Do you see Mao up there? Cute. And I hope you weren't too mad at the video. If you were, I'm sorry. This is the first video of a lot that I'm going to release about the Spanish Civil War, so stay tuned, especially for the next video that's coming up, which is about a beautiful, amazing person from mi tierra querida, Federico García Lorca. If you like the video, make sure to subscribe, and as always, buenas tardes, noches y mañanas casamas. Adiós y shalom.